Welcome to the Mycitizenagency channel. If you are planning to move to the European Union, one of the most important questions that arises from the very first days is housing. Where and how to look for an apartment? Should you immediately consider buying real estate? And what pitfalls might await new EU residents? Today we will examine this issue in detail so that you have a clear understanding of all the stages involved. The first step is to decide on the type of accommodation. There are usually two options. Renting. This is the most flexible option, especially if you have just arrived in the country. It allows you to adapt calmly, get to know the area, understand the infrastructure, schools, transport, and price levels. Renting is convenient when you are still looking for a job, applying for a residence permit or citizenship, or simply want to test out life in a particular city without committing to a long-term contract. Buying. This option is relevant if you are planning to live in the country for a long time, are confident in your choice of region, or are considering real estate as an investment. In some countries, buying a home can also simplify the process of obtaining residency or even citizenship. In addition, it is a way to protect your capital from inflation and obtain a stable source of income by renting out the apartment. It is important to understand that the housing market in different EU countries has its own characteristics. For example, in Germany, there is a traditionally developed culture of long-term rentals. Many families live in rented apartments for decades, and this is considered completely normal. In Spain and Portugal, buying a home by the sea is popular not only with locals, but also with foreign residents, both for living and for renting to tourists. In France, renting in large cities such as Paris or Lyon can be expensive and bureaucratic, so some families prefer to move quickly to buying. In Eastern Europe, home for example in the Czech Republic, Poland or Hungary, buying property by foreigners is also common, as prices are still lower than in the western part of the EU, but the market is growing. Thus, the choice between renting and buying depends not only on your plans and financial capabilities, but also on the specifics of a particular country and even region. Where to look? Online platforms, similar to our familiar classifieds websites, are actively operating in Europe. Among the largest are Immobilien Scout 24 and WG Gesucht in Germany, Idealista and Fotocasa in Spain, Selogger in France, Immoweb in Belgium, OLX or Autodom in Poland. These sites allow you to filter offers by price, area, availability of furniture, and even rental terms. In addition to online portals, real estate agencies are popular in Europe. Working through an agency is more reliable, although more expensive. Sometimes you have to pay a commission. There is another option, so-called word-of-mouth chats and groups on social networks. In many countries, there are communities of immigrants where people share ads for rental properties. This method is faster but requires caution. There is a greater risk of fraud here. It is important to remember that good apartments in large cities rent out very quickly. In Munich, Paris, or Barcelona, several dozen people may respond to a single ad within the first few hours. Therefore, it is worth being prepared to act quickly. Call the agent, send documents, and even come for a viewing on the same day. Sometimes the landlord makes a decision based on their first impression of the tenant. What do you need to rent? This is where the first difficulty may arise. In the EU, tenants are required to provide an impressive package of documents to prove their solvency and reliability. The most common requests are proof of income. This can be an employment contract, a salary statement, or a bank statement. A certificate of no debts or a similar document on credit history. For example, in Germany, Schufa. Recommendations from previous landlords. This is quite common practice in the UK and the Netherlands. A guarantor, especially if you are a student or have just started a job. The guarantor undertakes to pay in case of your default. Deposit. In Germany, the standard is 3 months' rent. In Austria or Belgium, they often ask you to pay several months' rent in advance. In Spain, the deposit is usually equal to 1 or 2 months' rent, but a bank guarantee may also be requested. It is important to understand that the larger the city and the higher the demand, the stricter the requirements for the tenant. In small towns, on the contrary, the landlord may only require a minimum set of documents. Rental agreement. Always carefully check the term of the agreement and the conditions for early termination. In some countries, the landlord may require a minimum stay of 1 or even 3 years. If you decide to move out earlier, there is a high probability of losing your deposit or even part of your rent payments. For example, in France, there is a rule of notification of termination of the lease, préavis, and if you do not give 1 3-month notice, your deposit may be forfeited. Utilities. In advertisements, the price is often indicated as net rent, excluding additional costs. As a result, the following may be added to the rent: heating, electricity, gas, water, garbage collection, building maintenance, and internet. On average, these expenses increase the monthly amount by 30 to 50%. In Germany, for example, Nebenkosten are mandatory, utility and operating costs that are sometimes comparable to the rent. Furniture. In Germany and Austria, apartments are often rented out completely empty, without a kitchen, cabinets, or appliances. Sometimes you get literally bare walls and the furnishing is entirely up to you. Buying furniture and appliances can be a serious expense. In other countries, such as Spain, on the contrary, apartments are most often rented furnished, which saves time and money at the start. Agency commissions. In some countries, tenants still pay a commission to the real estate agency. It can amount to 1 or 2 months' rent. In Austria and France, for example, such commissions are common. In Germany, since 2015, the rule whoever orders the service pays, Bestellerprinzip, has been in force, so the landlord pays for the agency's services. But if you contact the agency yourself, the cost may fall on you. Competition. In large cities, renting is a race. Good apartments receive dozens of applications in the first few hours after publication. In Berlin or Amsterdam, the queue for viewing can reach 30 to 40 people. This means that even with a good set of documents, you may face rejections and the search will take weeks or months. If you are sure about your move and want to settle in the country, buying a home is a great option. It not only provides comfort and stability, but is also an investment in the future. However, there are many nuances that are important to consider. The buying process. It may vary in different EU countries, but the general outline is as follows: selecting a property and preliminary agreement. Once you have found a suitable apartment or house, a preliminary agreement is signed. Compromis de vente in France, contrato de arras in Spain, which sets out the main terms of the transaction. Sometimes at this stage, you will need to pay a deposit of 5 to 10% of the purchase price. Verification of documents and legal compliance. It is very important to ensure that the property is not encumbered with debts, is not under arrest, and has all the necessary permits. In Germany or Austria, this is checked by a notary. In other countries, it is worth involving a lawyer. Signing the main contract at the notary. In the EU, the notary is a key figure in the transaction. They confirm the identity of the parties, verify the legality of the transaction, and enter it in the state register. Transfer of funds and registration of ownership. After paying the full amount, you officially become the owner, and your information is entered in the land registry or a similar state register. Mortgage. It is possible for a foreigner to obtain a loan in the EU, but the conditions are usually stricter than for local residents. Down payment. As a rule, banks require 20 to 40% of the property value. In Portugal and Spain, the minimum threshold for non-residents is usually higher than for citizens of the country. Proof of income. The bank may request salary statements for the last 6 months, tax returns, and account statements. Stability and transparency of income sources are important. Residency status. In some countries, it is easier to obtain a mortgage if you already have a residence permit or permanent residence. For example, in Austria, loans are rarely granted without a residence permit. Interest rates? In Europe, they are often lower than in other countries, on average 3.5% per annum. This makes a mortgage a profitable instrument even with large initial investments. Additional features. In some countries, buying a home can be grounds for obtaining a residence permit. For example, Greece and Portugal have golden visa programs for investors. In new countries of residence, it is worth considering the cost of home insurance. In Spain and France, it is actually mandatory, and in Germany, it is highly recommended. The choice of region is also important. An apartment in the center of Berlin and an apartment by the ocean in Portugal will differ not only in price, but also in the level of taxes, rental income, and prospects for growth in value. Taxes and fees. Buying real estate in the EU always comes with additional costs. Each country has its own tax. In Spain, it is 6–10% of the property value. In France, it is about 7%. In Portugal, it is 5–8% depending on the region. In Germany, there is a land tax, Grunderwerbsteuer, which can be up to 6.5%. Added to this are notary fees, registration fees, and sometimes agent fees. As a result, the final cost may increase by 10 to 15% compared to the advertised price. Maintenance. The owner of an apartment or house is required to pay not only utilities, but also an annual property tax. The amount of tax depends on the region and the size of the property. In addition, apartment buildings have monthly payments to the Hausverwaltung or Copropriété, which is a fund for building maintenance, elevator repairs, cleaning, and yard improvements. For example, in Italy, a condominio can cost several hundred euros per month. Repairs and condition of the property. European architecture is beautiful, but old houses often have problems. Outdated heating systems that require complete replacement, poor sound insulation, especially in houses from the 19th and early 20th centuries, the need for expensive major repairs to the facade or roof. All these costs are borne by the apartment owners in proportion to their share of ownership. There have been cases where new owners have unexpectedly received bills for tens of thousands of euros for building restoration. Language barrier. All transactions are formalized in the official language of the country. If you do not speak French, Spanish, or German, it is easy to miss important details. Penalties for early sale, mortgage terms, inheritance procedures. Misunderstandings can be very costly, so the involvement of an interpreter or lawyer is practically a prerequisite. Financial liquidity. Real estate in Europe can take longer to sell than you are used to. For example, in small towns in Germany or Austria, the sale process can take 6 to 12 months. This is important to consider if you are planning to resell or are counting on a quick return on your investment. Legal features. Some countries have restrictions on the purchase of land by foreigners. For example, in Croatia or Hungary, this requires additional permission. And in Switzerland, which is not part of the EU but is popular with buyers, there are strict quotas on the purchase of housing by foreigners. Check the owner and agency. Always check who exactly is renting or selling the property. In Europe, there are state property registers where you can check ownership. If you are working through an agency, make sure it is licensed and officially registered. Pay only after signing the contract. Never transfer advance payments on faith. In Europe, there are widespread scams where, under the guise of a landlord, you are asked to transfer a deposit through international transfer systems, with the promise to send the keys by mail. A real landlord or agent will never demand payment before signing the contract. Legal support. Be sure to use the services of a notary or lawyer who is familiar with local law. Even if the transaction seems simple, there is always a risk of missing details, fines, additional payments, residency restrictions. A specialist will protect you from legal mistakes and financial losses. Work only with licensed agents. Choose reputable real estate agencies that have an office and public contact information. Avoid private intermediaries who offer housing only through messengers. Real agents sign contracts and provide all documentation officially. Translation and understanding of terms and conditions. All documents are drawn up in the official language of the country. If you do not have sufficient command of the language, order a translation of the contract. It is cheaper than dealing with the consequences of misunderstanding later. Put agreements in writing. Even if you communicate with the landlord directly, verbal agreements are not legally binding. All terms and conditions, from the lease term to the availability of furniture, must be specified in the contract. As we have seen, finding housing in the European Union is a serious and multi-stage task. You need to take into account the characteristics of each country's market, prepare an impressive package of documents, and correctly assess taxes, fees, and hidden costs. Both renting and buying real estate can bring you comfort and stability, but they can also turn into stress and additional costs if you don't approach the issue competently. It is important to understand that with EU citizenship, this process becomes much easier and more profitable. You do not need to prove your solvency at the level of a foreigner. Banks and landlords are more willing to accommodate citizens. You are eligible for a mortgage on the same terms as local residents with a minimum down payment and lower interest rates. You have the opportunity to freely choose your country of residence without being restricted by visas and residence permits. And most importantly, you become a full participant in the European real estate market with all the rights and protections provided to EU citizens. Mycitizenagency helps you navigate the path to EU citizenship as reliably and safely as possible. We accompany our clients at every stage, from consulting on documents to obtaining a passport. With EU citizenship, your life abroad will become truly comfortable. Renting and buying a home will no longer be a challenge, but will become a convenient and profitable process. If you want to find out if you have a chance to obtain citizenship, leave a request for a free consultation at the link in the description. We will study your situation, draw up your personal immigration plan, and prepare a complete package of documents for successfully obtaining citizenship in one of the European Union countries. Thank you for watching this video. If you are interested in this topic, subscribe to the channel and feel free to ask questions in the comments. We regularly publish program reviews, answer frequently asked questions, and share important news about immigration law and life in the EU. Your journey to Europe begins with the first step. Mycitizenagency is there for you every step of the way.